This is going to be another suffix lesson. Remember when we started learning about suffixes last week, and we said that a suffix is an ending that goes on the word, that changes the word a little bit, depending on how you want to use it in the sentence. Now, last week we worked with the suffix ed. We said when you add ed to a word, it helps you know that that thing happened in the past. So instead of saying, I will call my grandma tomorrow, I could say, I called my grandma yesterday. Called, adding that ed to the end, helps you know that it happened in the past. It's not going to happen. It's not happening right now. It happened in the past. That's what ed does for words. Now, last week I asked you to submit some words on Seesaw that showed an ed ending. And I just want to point out a couple things. Some of us submitted words like this. This word, fed, does have an ed at the end, but that's not something that we added to the word. That's already part of the word. If I go back to that word call, like I've been using, talking about calling my grandma, the word call is a word all by itself. I can add endings to it to show when I'm doing that thing. Again, I can say called grandma or calling grandma. I'm adding parts, which are the suffixes, to the words here, ed and ing, to show when that thing is happening. The word fed is already a word by itself. If I add the ending ed to it, then it's feted, and that's not a word. And if I take off the ed, then it's just an F all by itself, and that's not a word either. If I take the ed off of this word, it still says call. That's a word. You know what that means. If I take the ing off, it still says call. But a word does not have a suffix just because it has an ed. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, last week I asked you specifically to listen for words that have the ed at the end, but it sounds like d instead of sounding like t or id. A lot of us had a lot of trouble hearing the sound at the end of the word and coming up with a word that ends with d in the ed instead of these two. So examples I gave you were called. Do you hear it? It just says d at the end. Played. Rolled. When I listen to that word, I should hear just a d at the end if I'm only trying to make a word like this. We're going to move on today to other sounds that ed can make. This is important because when you are writing words, you need to know how to spell them. And a lot of times, if you wrote a word like jump, you put a T at the end to make it say jumped. But actually, it's not a T. We don't spell jumped with a T at the end, even though it really sounds like a T, doesn't it? I'm going to show you some other words that end with ed. They sound like t. Here's an example that I just said. Jumped sounds like it has a T in the end, but it doesn't, and so we have to remember that when we go to write it. Another example of this is the word washed. Do you hear how it sounds like a t at the end? Washed. But that's not how we spell it. We use an ed to say I washed the dishes yesterday. Same with cooked. Cooked. It sounds like a T, but it's not. I'm teaching you this so that you know how to use these words in your writing, and it will help you know how to read them when you come across them in a book. Another example here is pushed. sounds like a T at the end, but it's not. I notice that these words both have SH in the middle. That has to do with the sound that we make at the end. If it has an SH or a K at the end of the root word, then it's going to sound like t, t, t at the end. Today on Seesaw, I'm going to ask you to come up with another word that ends with ED, but it sounds like T at the end. It sounds like a T. It's not, but it sounds like one. Washed, cooked, pushed, jumped. Those are all good examples. When you go to put your word on Seesaw, make sure that you listen really closely to the word that you're using. Make sure it ends with T at the end, but it's spelled with an ED, and it says T. Okay? We're going to keep learning more about suffixes and this ED ending next week.